Russians are pretty worried about you at this moment.
Oh, yeah, it has been ever since I started playing chess.
Then as a little boy?
That's right.
Beating men a lot older than yourself.
Just because the man's older doesn't mean he's smarter.
Well, how did you and Boris Spassky get along?
He's a nice guy, Bob, but we spoke very little to each other. In the morning, he'd say you're late, and in the evening, I'd say checkmate.
So it began in 1966 when they played their first game. Let's analyze it. Fischer prepared this opening in bed.
I like to play the King's Indian, but he's an expert on the Samish, so...
It's the Grunfeld, Spassky's own variation. We see some pawn pushes to set the boundaries, and now at move 20, it's dead equal. They trade some pawns, but more importantly, rooks, and now Spassky is lining his pieces up on the diagonal. Here, king h8 seems logical, but because the activity, white's a little better. Spassky takes the pawn, recaptures, and here's an interesting knight h5 idea. It's poisoned with mate, therefore black would need to counterattack the queen, and this endgame is winning for white with perfect play. But Spassky goes queen d2, forces another trade, Bobby trades queens and rooks, jumps the knight with a nice fork idea. Here black shouldn't have allowed h5, instead jumping the knight and trading into a draw. But what's done was done, and Bobby had to keep his knight there. And here after bishop a2 he resigned. Why? Because using the bishop and the two extra pawns, white eventually overloads black and promotes. Now we see Bobby regretting his decisions, and the moments we are shown were drawn. They didn't face each other until the World Championship in 1972. And then it begins. This would later be known as the best World Championship match ever. Let's look at game 1. It starts with the Nimzo Indian. There's a quick queen trade, and both sides get good development before trading knights. Now there's another minor exchange, and the rooks are traded off as well. What a peaceful start. Then the kings and knights prepare for an endgame, and the rooks trade. Black pushes the pawn, and Spassky agrees to trade off the final knight. What a peaceful start to the championship it was. Or was it? Here comes the most controversial move of the game, bishop h2. After g3, it's just trapped. And just look at the reaction. However, grandmasters argued that black might have enough compensation for the bishop. Here, for example, h3 might have been the plan, but the bishop is still trapped, and after getting another pawn for it, black loses. Okay, so in the game, Fischer's approach was better even though he still had to give it up. And after king d6, Kasparov recommended king g4. But here, eventually, white loses all the pawns and it's drawn. But Spassky found the best move, a4. King up, bishop a3, and king e4, and now b6. This position is really hard to evaluate, but e5 is a move that draws this. Now g6, and if a5, then black has a stalemate trick on those three squares and draws. But if king g4, black needs to play a5, and now using the two pawns, black just manages to not lose. g6 is also fine. Did Fischer find these? No. He played f5. And it was just enough for Spassky to win. Then he famously abandoned game 2, and in the third one, Spassky agreed to certain conditions because he didn't want to be known as the champion who won by forfeit. And this game is really decisive. Fischer's down 2 points. It starts with Benoni. The players build a similar setup, and here knight h5 shows great positional understanding of Fischer. We were shown a queen move and the knight trade in the movie. Then it proceeded with queen attack. Bishop and Fischer began advancing the queenside pawns cause he desperately needed a win. Spassky also has some ideas doubling the rooks. Here rook b8 and a pawn trade, and black has a space advantage, but nothing too crazy for now. c4 kicking the queen, he also doubles the rooks, pushes h5, and there's a precise king h7. Because the bishop pair and the space advantage, it looks like black's crushing even though the material is even. That's really some magic. Then he goes back with the king, trades off the bishop, which you don't normally do with a bishop pair, but here it was a removing the defender tactic. Now black's up a pawn. Spassky threatens mate, and then gets his bishop pinned. Here's bishop f5 and queen check. Let's see how they showed the following moves in the film. And after bishop d3, Spassky resigns because white can't stop those pawns. It's time for game 4. After the battles, they prepare for the later game with Sicilian, trade knights, pawn trade, and rook trade. Looks peaceful. h5, h4, and bishop e3. Black tries to attack, and this pawn exchange happens. A precise king g7 to try and get that king. Then knight exchange, and Spassky threatens mate, but Fischer defends using this pin, and ultimately they come to a draw. In Game 5, according to the movie, Spassky complains about the chair, but we'll see the game. It's the Nimzo Indian defense again, and Fischer creates a backward c-pawn, d6, e4, e5, fighting for the center. The knight gets kicked and rerouted. Then both sides open up the f-file, bishop attacks pawn, and castles the h5. The h-file gets locked, Spassky doubles the rooks, and Fischer here goes for a massive reroute with the queen and the knight. Double rook trade, bishop attacks knight, knight jumps up attacking the queen, and now something like queen b1 or f3 would lead to equality. But Spassky blunders a tactic with queen c2, and after Fischer finds it, resigns. What just happened? An equal position got blundered away. If queen takes bishop, then black takes on e4 with two mating threats, and if king f2, there's knight check, queen h4 to f4, and a beautiful knight c1 mate. That's why. Fischer ties the score, and then there's game 6. Fischer decides to surprise his opponent with the opening. It starts with the queen's gambit declined, the bishop gets kicked, and this massive exchange happens. Then Fischer brings out the queen, rook and bishop, and uses the fact that the pawn is pinned to take here. A recapture, the knight jumps, cause yet again, black's pinned and there's another trade. e4 and the pressure is on. f4, e5, bishop c4, white's building up an attack. Now queen a3, knight defends, and even though Spassky tries to drag the attention to the A and B files, f5 just can't be ignored, and Fischer doubles his rooks, as well as queen g3 and aggressive pawn pushes. Queen up, and black is paralyzed. They can't let white get on to the back rank. Fischer slowly drags the rook up, repositions the piece, and here Spassky tries to defend by knight f6. But the rook can take, white captures without hesitation as after recaptures there's rook f6. The king tries to run, Bobby Fischer finds a precise bishop c4, the king gets away from the discovery, and after queen f4 there's no point in trying. Spassky resigns. For example, there's queen g8, rook h6, queen check, and black's king is locked in a box. c7 wins as white promotes. As the movie tells us, Bobby won and became world champion just to forfeit. And with that, a certain group of Soviet chess players was playing for the title. Let's not call it that. On his way in the car, Fischer set up this. It's the game's 6th position after 18 moves. But wait, the movie tells us about the 1992 match against the former world champion, Boris Spassky. That one was really bizarre. It featured Fischer's first official game after 20 years. Bobby needed money. It was held in Montenegro, and Bobby never came back to America. Let's see what he had to say about it.
How do you rate Spassky now? I mean, what are the chances, do you think, of your holding on again in a return match with Spassky?
Oh, I think I beat him, much more easily. I've broken him.
But most importantly for us, 2 games of it were actually memorable as well. In this game, Fischer, playing with white, plays b4 in Polish opening style and gives 2 pawns. However, he gets one back and finds a precise knight d2, which is only possible because Spassky didn't double down on the knight. Knight c4 and f5 with discoveries. Bishop takes bishop, knight check, and knight takes knight. If Spassky was to take the rook, Bobby would counterattack his, and black has to give it. But f6 was played and they traded queens, which is usually a sign that the game is calming down, but we can see it's the opposite. King up, knight takes rook, and Fischer finds a temporary knight sacrifice, which he quickly regains by attacking the pinned bishop. Bishop c6 defending the rook check has a flaw. White can trade rooks. Then the game featured a pawn race, but white eventually just gave the rook, and after king d6, the bishop loss is inevitable, and then white just wins, so Spassky resigned. Fischer has still got it at 50, but the final game of today topped that off. First, it's just your average Rui Lopez position, and Fischer attempts some reroutes. The bishop gets kicked, the sides push their boundaries with the pawns, and white lines up the battery, just like in the modern defense. Fischer suddenly moves his strongest pieces to the queen side and gets an Alekhine's gun, and the knight also drives. You see me talking about Fischer's actions a lot, but you have to give credit to Spassky. He sacrifices a knight to push, and there's some pressure on the king side. Rook a7, and if the sides were to trade, it would have been a really interesting endgame with a piece for 2 pawns and chances for them both. But Spassky decides to go king f6, unpinning the bishop, and then trades, which is worse for black, and Fischer tries to find the winning way. g4 is a great start, and even though the rooks are now off the board, Fischer sacrifices the bishop. Knight h4, queen check, and the compensation is that open king. Knight f5. Fischer keeps on the fireworks. If takes, it's mate in 1 by the bishop. Bishop down, queen f4, and the knight still can't be taken because bishop check, queen check, knight check, and here white wins the knight. There's a royal fork. And black will be able to get it back. And here's what I got after playing out 16 moves. White wins here. King down, so knight saves itself, queen check, bishop e4, and that queen is not coming back anytime. Knight b5 to d6, destroying that king's shelter, and after knight e6, there's queen e5 forcing Spassky to resign. And then, because the mating threats are too strong, he has to give it up and lead himself into a royal fork. Fischer won that match by 5 points and hasn't played an official game up to his death in 2008 when Russians lost the chess throne.